Hi everyone. This feels like the millionth attempt of recording this, but I'm trying to keep this as succinct. Succinct, so a word for your lip. Succinct, succinct, CT, Succinct, which means knapp und präzise. Yeah. I had many interruptions. My head is not in the game. I might sound good, but I'm still struggling with a little bit with a few health issues. Anyhow, this is about your presentation, what to do and what not to do, and then I'm going to model a presentation for you. I'm going to give you a presentation. Now, I gave my Wednesday groups a presentation. I've already given them one about how to learn vocabulary and remember it. However, that was more just like a vocabulary task. I'm going to give an actual content-based presentation today. And after the presentation, I'm going to explain some strategies in my presentation that you can adopt for your own presentation. Now that there are two major differences on SWA, the differences are introduction and analysis. Now, the presentations are going to be a lot like your Matura presentations, except for these two things, introduction and analysis. I think in Matura, you probably just said, hi, my name is blah, 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 and this is my presentation about blah, 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 right? In a presentation for KF and indeed for Wirtschaftssprachen, classes, you're going to have to open what is called a bang. So what does this mean? An anecdote, a short story, or a hypothetical situation, or a leading, guiding, rhetorical question. I am going to open with a hypothetical situation. It's a little story. Okay? And then what I want you to do is have an analysis. So what is your opinion about the presentation, about the information you're giving? So here's why a biography is a bad choice for your presentation. Imagine imagine the worst lecture you can imagine. Maybe it's my class. But even so, imagine the worst, most boring lecture where the professor is just reading from the slides and saying this is this and then this happened and da 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 da. And it's just like listing information, but there's no analysis, there's no introspection, there's no diving into the details. It's just listing information. You're bored, right? Your brain is probably far away thinking about something else. Well, mine will be too if you do the same thing. If you say, okay, here is why Chile is the strongest economy in South America. Or here is the history of the Incan civilization in Central and South America. I mean, I love history, but I don't really care about this kind of thing in a 7-minute presentation. What you need to do is give your opinion why something is important. Yeah? It could be anything though. I had a student 2 semesters talk about a rapper from Cologne that he thinks changed the rap game in Germany, that he thinks changed Deutsche rap. And he gave a really good analysis of why and why this rapper has left a cultural imprint on the German rap scene. And he got a 1. It was a fantastically structured presentation. I felt his passion in it. I felt his interest in it. And he gave me something to think about. It doesn't have to be rocket science for me to think about it. It can be something simple, but you have to tell me why it's important to you. What's the key take? You have to give me some kind of takeaway, not just a list of events. For example, a student today asked me, can I do a presentation about the Styrian wine country, I think, or a Weinstraße or something like this? And I said no, not because I don't think it's interesting at all. I just don't think it offers much of an analysis. So if you just give me where it is, how much wine is made, who visits it, it's kind of like a facile presentation. So simple, basic, schoolish presentation. But if you tell me why it's so important for the Austrian economy, or if they're making new hybrid wines, or why it's important for the wine trade in general, then I would say it's an okay presentation to do. Someone else today has asked me, hey, can I do a presentation on social media? Now I get 100 presentations about social media a semester, or requests. It has to be narrowed down. Another student said, "Can I do social media, but specifically trolls, the different types of trolls, how to deal with them, their effect on internet culture?" That's a much, much better direction for social media. So the other guy who said, "Can I do social media?" then talked about certain effects that it has on the brain or something like that, and then I said, it's fine. You have to narrow down the topic and you have to give some kind of key takeaway. Okay, I'm going to give you a very brief presentation now. I'm going to give it without stopping, and then at the end, I'm going to break it down slide by slide. Now, before I begin my presentation, or I'm beginning it now, I'd like to transport you all a million years ago to the plains of Africa, where the first humans uh, lived. So imagine you're one of these early humans strolling the plains of Africa in search of food. You find a tree full of fruit, ripe for the picking, and you and your companions are ready to grab a bunch, eat it there, and then take some back. But just before you can do it, you hear a rustle in the grass. You hear a sound in the grass. Now you have a split second to make a decision because back then, without all kinds of civilization based protections, a split second decision could mean life or death. So the sound in the grass could be 20 different things, let's say, for sake of argument. But for the sake of brevity, so to keep it short, let's pretend it's just two different things. It's a predator, an animal that can kill and eat you, or B, the wind. Now, keep in mind you have a split second to make this decision. If you decide that it is a predator and you start running, and it is actually a predator, like a lion or something, then you have a better chance of survival if you've already started running, right? Let's say it is the wind and you think it's a predator and you run away anyway. Well, you missed out on some delicious fruit, but you didn't roll the dice. You didn't take a chance, and it's probably a good thing because if you had taken a chance and it was a predator, let's say it was a predator, but you say it's the wind, well, that's the end of you. You're dead meat. Maybe some of your companions are dead as well, and you don't get to pass your genes on to uh, the next generation of human beings, right? So that's the end of your genes in the gene pool. I want you to keep this evolutionary, neuroscientific, or evolutionary psychological example in mind because it's going to come up later in my presentation about cognitive biases and why people believe weird things. Okay, so my name is Andrew Small. As you all know, I am kind of your teacher this semester. I'd like to give you a brief look at cognitive biases and explain why I think a lot of human beings believe weird things. So, what is my structure in this presentation? Well, let's have a look at my table of contents. Firstly, I'm going to talk about the other reasons, other than evolutionary psychology and other than neuroscientific definitions and cognitive biases, other reasons why people may believe weird things. After that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what cognitive biases are. Then I'm going to explain why they occur. After that, I'm not going to give you examples because if we're not in class, if we were in class, I was going to devote an entire day in class to this and go over some examples. Maybe I'll do this later anyway, just as a warm-up activity. Then I'm going to tell you how to avoid these cognitive biases, and after that, I'll give you a brief explanation of my sources. So, what are some other reasons that people may believe weird things? Now, if you read my article about veganism and you read my new article for your commentary about freedom of speech, you're going to realize that I'm not the biggest fan of capitalism. And I think capitalism also makes people believe weird things. Now, I could go on and on and on about this. I could write a PhD about this, and still not scratch the surface. Uh, Philosophers have been doing this for 200 years, but I will say that the goal of capitalism is always to create new markets. So even if something doesn't make sense, let's say lizard people are taking over world governments and something like this. many quote unquote normal people won't believe this, but there will be enough people who do believe this to create a market. And then these alternative markets have products with them. Yeah, so lizard people exist and they're gonna take over your government and destroy every major world civilization. So here's some beef jerky and really warm underwear that will help you survive the harsh winters after civilization falls. So, in summary, people might believe weird things because the powers that be, corporations, and so on, have created markets that encourage these kind of beliefs. And when I say consumer behavior, what I mean is we are taught, at least in the United States, where I think crazy is at an all-time high, that the customer is king and the customer is always right. So whatever I believe, or I can summarize it like this: I believe, therefore I am. Meaning, whatever I believe is the truth because I'm the customer and the customer is king, the customer is always right. And I have all of these markets and websites and so on to confirm my beliefs, right? Okay, so I want to put that to bed. I could talk more about neoliberalism and so on, but I don't want to bore you to tears here. Number two, I think this is kind of connected to my thesis because fear makes us believe strange things sometimes. We don't understand why certain events happen, why certain people do specific things, and it causes us to be afraid. But I believe that deep in the mind, in the primitive mind of all humans, that we fear death. We ultimately fear dying. And there are the unknown, things we don't know, are connected with death. And so when we are afraid, we tend to believe certain things that might be a little bit strange just so we can sleep at night or not be preoccupied with these uncomfortable thoughts. I think this is connected to cognitive biases, but something even more primitive than cognitive biases. So I think fear is another reason why people believe weird things. Number three and four are a little shorter and easier to explain. Genuine cognitive impairment. What does that mean? Just a nice way to say some people are not very smart. And I'm not saying this like pat yourselves on the back. I'm gonna pat myself on the back, guys. We're so smart. But some people are just not smart and believe weird things because they can't understand the complexity of certain events. Complex questions often have complex answers, and if you're not very smart, then you might look for an easy or simple answer for something. And this goes hand in hand with number four, poor education. A thing in the United States where I said crazy is at an all-time high. Uh, the customer is always right there, and we defund schools. We take away a lot of money from away from schools, and critical thinking is really never taught in schools. I once asked a teacher what was Germany before Germany. He said Prussia, so Preußen, right? And I said, well, what was it before Preußen? He said nothing. It was always Preußen. Um, I bet if I asked him about the history of Austria, I'd get a similar answer. So he was more concerned with coaching the high school football team than understanding history. And a lot of my teachers were like this. So poor education is a big thing in the United States and around the world, I think, why certain people believe weird things. Okay, now this takes a lot more of my presentation than I would like because this is more difficult to explain. But now we've ruled out some of the other reasons I think people believe weird things. But what are cognitive biases then? Well, excuse me for a second. I don't want you to do this on your presentations, but I'm going to read very briefly or part of this bullet point here. A cognitive bias is a systematic error in thinking that occurs when people are processing and interpreting information. What does this mean? Okay, it's just an error, a problem that occurs when we look at the world around us and we try to understand what is happening. Just like the early humans on the plains of Africa. In that moment, they're trying to process the information, but they have to process it fast because if they take too long, it could mean death. Now, I'll talk more about that in just a second when we talk about why they occur. I just want you to know this term was first coined, That's a way to say a term, a Begriff or a Bezeichnung, something like that, was created. We say the term was coined by Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman in 1972. Maybe you guys have heard of Daniel Kahneman. He is a neuroscientist who has written many books, but a famous one is Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. Every time I'm on vacation in Italy or if I in Thailand or something like that, somebody is reading this on the beach, and I've seen it in German quite a bit. So why do they occur then? Well, let's go back to the first example. I have to, if as an early human, I had to make a decision very quickly. So oftentimes, my brain and the brains of my ancestors over generations of humans had to make decisions quickly and find patterns that aren't there. And they had to find the patterns that aren't there so they could be sure to find the patterns that are actually there, right? So thinking it's a predator and seeing reasons for it being a predator will help me, even if it's the wind, will help me know when it's a real predator. Basically, every time it's a real predator. Yeah. So if you think about it, human beings, the default state of our brains, the general state is belief. Belief is our default state. Skepticism, so being skeptical, right, is not natural because skepticism can lead to death. Yeah. So we often find patterns that aren't there. Our brains become hyper aware in finding these patterns. And this is what's actually known as patternicity in the neuroscientific world. Um, Unfortunately, patternicity finds real patterns and what I've just said before, cognitive noise or cognitive noise creates cognitive biases. What is a cognitive bias? An error in thinking. If you're interested in this, you can go online and there's actually a formula for this. I forgot what it means, but P is patternicity equals I think T is threat and cause, C is cause. I'm not 100% sure. I don't remember, but there's an actual equation that has been coined by neuroscientists. If you're interested in the example, the hypothetical situation that I gave at the beginning of the presentation, it is called a false attribution error. Today, some of the most common errors we see are confirmation bias. So I think you guys are familiar with this. If you've taken any business psychology class, it's got to be a part of it. Um, a sunk cost fallacy is a big one. So oftentimes, and with my ex-girlfriend, she wanted to watch movies after an hour and a half of the movie being terrible. She said, it's only a half an hour more. Uh, it could get better. But in my head, I was thinking, yeah, it's already been an hour and a half. Do you think there's going to be some amazing ending that saves the entire movie? And that's why we broke up. No, I'm kidding. It's not. That's not the reason why. Um, yeah, so in the business world, people often, there's a Redewendung, an idiom we say, to throw good money after bad money. And that means maybe you invest, you make a bad investment, but you're afraid to pull out because you've invested this money already. So you think, hey, if I just put a little more money into it, it'll turn around. But you end up just wasting more time, more resources than you did before. That's a big one. And another one is cognitive dissonance. I don't want to go into all of these, but those three are definitely a big problem in the sales world, in the actuary world. So if you're going to work with numbers in the future, there are plenty of cognitive biases that come with numbers. And actually, as a marketer, as someone who works in marketing, I actually was taught to use these cognitive biases against customers. So exploit them. It sounds very evil, but a lot of marketing psychology is based on trapping people in their cognitive biases. Moving on to examples. Don't want to I don't want to use them today. I gave you some false attribution error, sunk cost, cognitive dissonance. I didn't explain what confirmation bias or cognitive dissonance were, but maybe we'll talk about them when I come back from being ill. Now, the last thing I'd like to cover, my analysis here, is how can we avoid them? We've talked about, what they are, but how can we avoid them? There's no there's no fantastic solution for this. Um, Being aware of cognitive biases is half the battle. Most people ignore them entirely. They're like, I always trust my gut. I always trust my Bauchgefühl. Yeah. And actually, there was a study done. I don't remember the name, but it showed that detectives who trust their Bauchgefühl more than other methods of investigation were, I think, incorrect 90% of the time. Now, I'm not telling you never trust your gut feeling. If you're dating someone you think is an asshole, there's quite a good possibility that they're an asshole. If you really feel that way, what I'm saying is in business, when making decisions with money, when making decisions with customers, when making decisions with numbers, maybe think about, okay, my brain is a flawed machine, okay? And there could be other factors that influence my decision making. Now, in this situation, what could they be? Yeah. And if you do that, then maybe go against your gut feeling based on the other factors and the information you've gathered from the whole rather than little pieces. A good example of this, in his book Cognitive Noise, Daniel Kahneman talks about two judges in the same city who came from very similar backgrounds, had very similar opinions about how to serve justice to the community, but oftentimes they handed out very different sentences. And this isn't exactly a cognitive bias, it's more cognitive noise. So what he found out was the time of day and whether they had eaten or not played a big role in also the day of the week. If it was a Monday or a Friday verdict, Urteil played a big role in what kind of sentence they handed out to the criminal. And yeah, uh, so these are factors that can all affect our opinion. Past experiences. That's where cognitive biases come in. Gambler's fallacy is a good one. Well, I never I never lost my luggage on a plane before, right? So it won't happen again. Of course it can happen. Just because something happened every single time in the past doesn't mean it can't happen in the future. It's called the gambler's fallacy because I think some city in the US or Monaco, sorry, they were playing roulette and it came up 21 times black. So everyone said, gotta be red. It's gotta be red the next time. And people bet red. And it kept coming up black until it was about 26 or 27 times. Why does it have to be red? There's no balancing force in the universe. Doesn't exist. But we as humans may believe something like that. Okay, I digress. I'm talking too much here. Um, so I would say to avoid them, be aware, consider factors when making decisions, and challenge them if you can. Yeah. So last but not least, let's look at my sources. This is a great book just for a summary of maybe 20 or 30 different cognitive biases, The Art of Thinking Clearly. Then we have Daniel Kahneman, Attention and Effort, and Michael Shermer, The Believing Brain. These are all books I used to make my presentation here, my brief presentation. So thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, you can ask me in class. All right, guys, let's break this down really quick. I started my presentation with a story, with a hypothetical situation. Then I broke it down with a table of contents. I gave you my structure. After that, I mean, you don't have to do this. I like to rule out some information, but honestly, I didn't do a great job. It ended up taking the majority of my presentation, I believe. But in any case, as I phased between my slides, as I phased between them, I asked rhetorical questions. I said, so what are the other reasons? What are cognitive biases? Now, let's talk about what they are and why do you think they occur? What are some examples? How can we avoid them? So I asked rhetorical questions throughout the presentation. That's what you should do. You shouldn't just say, next, let's look at this. Now looking at this, moving on to this. Listen, guys, if you adapt my style, which is the English speaking style, and you have some wrong grammar, some vocabulary is off, some pronunciation off, but I see you're making an effort with the style, I'm gonna give you more points. Okay? So keep that in mind. And then at the end, I had an analysis. Why they're important, why we should avoid them, how we can avoid them. Excuse me. So you have to give some kind of analysis. That's pretty much it. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me via WhatsApp. Um, and please leave your presentation topics in the forum.